Hi, esteemed colleagues. I'm Jae Kang in the Department of Communication here at SNU. Warm welcome to you and to the K-Future session. It's been a long day, I'm sure, and our session will make it even longer now. Really. So tighten your seatbelt. I'm very delighted to be part of this project and then to serve as a moderator for this session. But I would like to congratulate Professor Yu and Kwang Hyung-gi and his team for making this happen. It's a brilliant job. Let me say just a few words about the K-Future team. The K-Future project is an initiative that seeks to develop the field of Korean studies by introducing a novel temporal perspective. Our work seeks to complement the existing body of knowledge by exploring contemporary Korean society through a future-oriented lens. Our project adopts a different temporal focus. We are examining present-day phenomena in Korea as a potential indicator of future societal developments. We call these contemporary trends and practices symptoms of K-futurity. The symptomatology of our project refers to the common theoretical and methodological propositions that we believe may offer a distinctive insights into the trajectory of Korean society. By employing the symptomatology, the K-Future team is investigating a diverse range of topics, including future-oriented practices of specific social groups, trends in financial practices, emerging lifestyle and popular media representations, religious beliefs and practices, technological advancements such as semiconductor technology, and finally, but not least, societal and cultural shift, exemplified trends like veganism as well. Through critical analysis of these varied cases, we hope to construct a nuanced understanding of how Korean society envisions and works towards its future. We look forward to sharing our research with you throughout the conference and afterwards. So without further ado, let's get on with it. Our session has a slightly different format. We will begin with the two session keynotes, and which will be followed by brief talks that will introduce each research topic. So the first keynote speaker is Kim Hong-jung, a professor of sociology at SNU. Professor Kim is a social theorist and sociologist of literature, culture, and film. So a bit of every cool thing he's working on. So his books include Sociology of Mind or Sociological De-Imagination, exploring social and cultural phenomena in Korea from his very distinctive and unique perspective, heavily influenced by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. So yes, unfortunately, Professor Kim is Deleuzian. Nobody's perfect. He's the leader of the K-Future team who invited us, who will represent respectively shortly, and organized and led this research team throughout. So we'd like to use this the opportunity to thank him for his dedication, commitment, and inspiration. So title of his talk is Survivalist Modernity. Please welcome Professor Kim.
Thank you, Professor Kang, for your overwhelming introduction of myself, which is hidden even for me, Deleuzian. Yeah. Good evening. My name is Kim Hong-jung. I'm from the Department of the Sociology at SNU. It's my honor to address you today at this conference. To introduce myself briefly, my academic focus lies in what can be called the psychosocial studies. It's been a little more than 10 years that I've been working on that kind of study. is relatively unconventional within sociology. It's it's not really acknowledged or recognized by the mainstream sociology, because my perspective poses that it's very difficult to distinguish the psychic and the social ontologically, including emotions, sentiments, affects, desire. I think the flows of those, psychic fluids are the very material of the construction of the social field and phenomena and events, etc., etc. That's my basic position. In that sense, I feel a little different from the mainstream sociologist in a way. In the context of Korean studies, I employ this psychosocial lens to dissect the cultural manifestations of Korean society. In line with this approach, my presentation today will explore survivalism. What is the survivalism? I don't know. Even though I've been working on this concept for more than 10 years, in fact, the connotation and the depth of that word, survival, to survive. In French, it's survie, it's more than life. It means that it implies that human life is worth living only when it has something more than life, more than the bare life. There must be something more than the fact that I'm living. Only under that condition, that life is worth living, or that life has value. That is suggested by that word, survival. So it's a kind of a very difficult word for me. And yes, it's true. But anyway, today I will narrow down the implication of that, that kind of philosophical reflections on the word into a more sociological thesis, according to which I consider the survivalism as the quintessential psychosocial driving force that has propelled our society all throughout the 20th century. Hence, the title of my presentation is The Survivalist Modernity. To begin with, those are the contents that I'm going to talk about today, I hope. And I would like to get started with, a kind of question. That question is, who is the contemporary Korean? There's a nuance here, because it's not the question, what is the contemporary Korean society, or how can we perform the contemporary Korean studies? I don't know. But I can imagine, I can make out an image of a Korean man or woman. That's contemporary Korean man. And I think that a contemporary Korean man is characterized by a kind of a schizophrenic assemblage of many different epochs, ideologies, and worldviews. For example, we are very industrialist on national affairs. We should produce, we should prosper, etc. But at the same time, we are democrat with regard to our own rights. We're doing our best to defend our rights, and we are able to sympathize with other people who have lost their rights. So we are democrat, but at the same time, we are harshly neoliberalist, especially as for the education of the children. So what are we? What are we? We are schizophrenic, and we are just a living montage of different epochs. And what is interesting is the fact that the word contemporaneous or the contemporary signifies just that kind of temporal composition of different times. So I think the Koreanness should not be found in the content, how they behave themselves or what they think, but in the very form which allows the Koreans to absorb, manage these contradictory systems without any problem. with high adaptability and plasticity. And I call that form survivalism. And it means that I think behind Korean democracy, there is a survivalist democracy. Behind Korean capitalism, there is survivalist capitalism. Survivalism is just like an operating system of a computer that makes things operate, runs, right? So, yeah, a very rough definition of the survivalism can be given just like that, a set of rules of conduct that place survival at the apex, at the top of the hierarchy of the values. And before I advance my thesis of the survivalist modernity, I think I should make a panoramic review of the previously presented theories about Korean modernity. The first one that I pay attention to is the theory presented by Professor Moon Sung-suk. I think many people, you guys are already familiar with her theory, militarized modernity. And militarized modernity, that concept centers on the Cold War period and the Park Chung-hee regime. And according to Moon, the fundamental principle of K-modernity or Korean modernity is the militarization. So Korean society is militarized, Korean people's mentality is a bit militarized, etc., etc. But I think this theory tends to limit the modernity to Cold War period. And second one would be the Confucian modernity. In fact, it's a kind of a cliche when it comes to all kinds of discourses on the Korean modernity, because many people have been talking about the Confucianism as the main resource, cultural resource of Korean modern man's mentality and collective, norms, etc. But I think it's difficult to explain the highly pragmatic, earthly, and aggressive energy and power for the survival shown by 20th century Korean people. It's more shamanic than Confucianist, in my thinking. So only with the Confucian moral system, our power of explanation is highly limited, my thinking. And the compressed modernity was proposed by Professor Jang Kyung-sub. And according to him, Korean modernity is characterized by the temporal compression, and that compression resulted in many problems. It's convincing, but I'm not so 100% satisfied with his theory because an important question is missing. That is, why? Why did Korean people legitimize this kind of modernization? In desiring what kind of future state, or propelled or driven by what kind of desire? Because I'm psychosocial sociologist. I have that kind of question already. Yeah. But I cannot find that answer in it. Reductionist modernity, that's similar to compressed modernity thesis, and presented by Kim Tok-young, an excellent social theorist. Inspired partially by these theories, I worked on a different theory on the Korean modernity since a long time ago. My thesis is that the idea, the idea, that's not idea, but the idea, Platonician idea. What is the idea of Korean modernity? That's my question. And to answer this question, I am perfectly delusional because that concept of idea is very singular and distinctive. I didn't find such a similar thing in other philosophers' discourses because Deleuze defined idea, he transformed the meaning of the idea not as a systematized ideology, totalized principle, actualized entity, but a repetitively recurring question. An idea that is a problem or a question, which returns obsessively to a certain group of subjects. So my question is that. My question is as follows. What's the idea of the Korean modality? It means, in other words, what kind of unsolvable problem or problems haunted Korean people? You know, it's haunting. It's not having an idea or thinking about something. It's kind of a possession. It's kind of a domination by that problem or thinking about that problem. That's important. The question is so important. That's not the modernization, development, etc., democracy. It's on the surface. It's on the surface of the real of the Korean modernity, but in depth of the Korean modernity stratification, I guess, I argue that the problem of survival was there. So we need to explore that problem theoretically and empirically in the field of the social sciences as well as in the field of the humanities. That's my argument. So what does that mean? What are the implications of that survival equal idea thesis? First implication is that 20th century Korea has the popular philosophy of survival compared to Heideggerian being or Sartrean existence or Levinasian other. We don't have such things. Korean people had no time to think about those things being, but they were obsessed by the problem of survival. That is popular philosophy. It means that methodologically I'm interested in people's thinking, people's sentiments, people's experiences. Second one is it's converting devices. Everything that is imported into Korean peninsula is turned into something different a little bit through the intermediary of the survivalism. We change something that we import from Europe, from Japan, from China, and I don't know where, but we change that with survivalism. What it can call survivalism. And the implication is the operating system that I already mentioned. So, how to define the survivalism theoretically? Because I'm a social theorist. That's a total, combination of three different theoretical elements that I'm using here, that I'm appealing to here. The first element, the first layer of the real of the survivalism is the flows of desire. It's completely delusion. If we lose that, if we miss that dimension, we have a tendency to criticize the survivalism. We are intellectuals and people are survivalists. It's not good, you are selfish. No, because we cannot criticize the desire. We can criticize their consciousness or their knowledge, or the way of life. We can moralize them, but we cannot not at all criticize the flows of desire. But I think, unfortunately, the flows of desire are the first layer of the survivalism. It means that I respect the survivalism of 20th century Korean society, in a sense. But that flows of desire is captured and governed by what Foucault calls governmentality, the conduct of conducts, the way of taming the behaviors of others. And the governmentality turns into a kind of psycho-regime, collective regime of culture or mentality. So if we lose sight of just one element of that, it's a very easy game, I'm positioning here at a lofty position, and I look down on the survivalist people or youngsters or neoliberalists, and I criticize them. And that constitutes the typically social scientific discourses. And I'm against that kind of discourse because we should understand why people turned into such a ferocious survivalist all throughout the history, at least with a span of 100 years. How much time do I have? Yeah. So my approach is necessarily historical, and I think there have been 3 waves of survivalist regimes in Korean modern times. First one was around 1894, and I call that international law survivalist regime because it was inaugurated in the wake of imperialist invasions and the loss of Joseon dynasty. And after almost 50 years after that event, traumatic event, we underwent a Cold War and devastating Korean War. And that traumatic event triggered the establishment of a different survivalist regime. And around 1997, we have been experiencing another different survivalist regime, neoliberal survivalist regime. So that's my position of looking at the 100 years of Korean modern times. 3 consecutive and successive variant waves of survivalism depending on the transformations of world order. First regime, that's the beginning of all story, because intellectuals of that time, irrespective of their political position, adopted social Darwinism. It's shocking. Everybody turned into social Darwinists and thought that this world is a jungle. Confucianist dream should be broken down because we were in the fantasy. The world is jungle. So to survive, we should acquire more power. Kind of a inclination, obsessive inclination toward the power. That moment was decisive. And secondly, Cold War and Korean War. And thirdly, neoliberal survivalist regime. I've been producing several articles on each of those epochs in terms of different survivalist semantics and pragmatics and politics, etc. So, in fact, now I'm editing that book, and that book will come out in 2 or 3 months. It's in Korean. And so I think I don't have much time today. So I will skip all those things that I prepared over. And that's the scheme, in Deleuzian terms, the abstract machine of Park Chung-hee's governmentality. And it's very interesting to see his discourses, to analyze his discourses with that scheme. Because he repeatedly utilizes the word survival everywhere. Park Chung-hee, Chung Ju-young, Jo Yong-gi, did I show? Yeah. 3 survivalist shamans of Korean society. I analyzed each of them, and I read their discourses and texts. And what is interesting is that, I learned a lot from Foucault that discourses are not realities. There are words and there are things. But in Korea at that time, there is no distinction between things and words, because Park Chung-hee is passing by a countryside and he is enunciating a word, let there be a factory. And tomorrow on, people are working to build a factory. What kind of word is that? It's not a discourse in Foucauldian terms. It's a biblical word, biblical discourse, ontogenetic, right? Words are hyper-pragmatic in those days. So it is very interesting to study the discourses, because discourses were alive. it infiltrated into the hearts and bodies of those people, poverty-stricken, immiserated. After the war, everybody was just like zombie. When you see 1950s literature, Korean literature, you cannot ever see a person proceed because everybody is perishing, really, perished, lost any kinds of hope for the future. So it's really difficult to read them. But in 1960s on, we see Kim Seung-ok. The first novel of Kim Seung-ok is The Practice of Life. And we evaluate that novel as the renovation of the sensibility without thinking about the historical context of that kind of resurrection. Those three shamans kind of performed, planned, and designed the resurrection of the Korean people with the help of their own ideology of survivalism, right? So I think, that's such a story. And and Cho Young-gi, so it's really interesting, Cho Young-gi, but I have no time, so I pass. Because what was interesting in Cho Young-gi's discourses, I know that Cho Young-gi is harshly criticized by many, even including me, but Cho Young-gi looked into the reality of Korean people in 1950s and 1960s because he did his sermons and services in the northern part of Seoul, where a lot of refugees from the North Korea were there. So he saw them. That kind of desperate situation and reality, and he came up with a very strange Pentecostalism, and the essence of that doctrine is that the Christianity that those people are in need of at that time is not the conservative, punitive Christianity, but life-enhancing, life-empowering Christianity. So he is talking about good God, 좋으신 하나님. What an idea, good God, right? It's crazy. God is not good. God is transcendent, but God is good, trapped in human moral code. That's Korean Christianity, coming from the survival, threatening situations of the Cold War period. So if you don't understand that historical situation, the discourses that you are studying into is floating just around there, just like a cloud. But match those discourses to the earth, and you see a very interesting landscape of a society which begins to resuscitate itself after, the zombie-like long state of death. And finally, I was going to talk about Minjung theology because I thought that this theology is very interesting in that it is it represents a sort of anti-survivalist survivalism. But okay, those two persons, Son Nam-dong and An Byung-moo, I adore, I respect, and I'm really into those two theologians' theology for several years. And I hope next time I will have a chance to talk about them together. Right? Oklos Minjung, etc. And Minjung has the power of self-transcendence. It means that they have the power to struggle against their own tendency to the survivalism. And that's magnificent, I think. And Kim Ji-hao, dialectics of Han and Don is magnificent also. And the future of survivalism, that's what we are going to talk about today. In fact, what will happen to the Korean survivalism in 21st century? That's another question. In terms of the task that we are going to perform in our team, will it be fortified? Korean people will become more strong survivalists in 21st century? Or will it change into a different psychoregime? Right? It's a conundrum, a puzzle, an interesting point of observation. And I'm working on the research of feminist vegans. It's a small fraction of people, but I learned that there is emerging a different attitude about the life. That is extension of survivalism to non-human beings. Post-humanist turn may be being introduced into the survivalist strong semantics, maybe. Zoe-centered vitalism, and they don't want to eat the flesh of other animals in the name of the zoe of that animal. It's not the bios of that animal. It's not the dignity of that animal. It's only the flesh and bone of that animal, and they recognize the importance of the zoe of other animals, non-humans. So humans and non-humans are not different. It's a very, kind of a small portion of hope, but I am working on those newly emerging phenomena in the name of kenotic survivalism. Kenosis, kenosis, that's self-emptying. There's two survivalisms, theoretically speaking. Konetic survivalism, konatus. I survive, so I fortify my being, just like Spinoza. And kenosis, kenotic survivalism. I survive and I empty myself. I empty my humanity. I humble myself down into the animals in order to survive together. Thank you.
I really hate to say that, but I told you so. He's a delusion. Well, next speaker is equally exciting. We have a French connection today, but no pressure at all. The Professor Natalie Luca is our next speaker, anthropologist, and she is research professor at National Center for Scientific Research and Center for Social Research on Religion in Paris. She wrote several books on cults, so we got some connection about this survivalist, the shaman through Jo Yong-gi and other religious figures as well. So her books include Le Salut par le Fou, une ethnologie dans Mexique coréen. Désolé pour ma pronunciation, je ne parle pas français. So the English title should be Salvation Through Football, an ethnologist at the home of a Korean Messiah. That was Natalie's first book a couple of decades ago. So, and since then, her works have such a massive impact on our anthropological imagination of Korean cult as well. So we are absolutely pleased to have her today. So the title of her talk today is What is Optimism? So please join me to welcome Professor Luca.
여러분들은 안녕하세요. I would like to warmly thank Professor Kim Hong-jun for inviting me to this meeting and allowing me to take an active part in the fascinating program of the new Research Center on Korean Studies hosted by Seoul University. It will be a great honor to integrate his team tackling our future theoretical experimentations. At the beginning of my research, probably because of my focus on the anthropology of religion, I didn't make any distinction between faith, optimism, and belief. These words were all synonymous to me. When I started studying entrepreneurship, I was struck by how the entrepreneurs I was meeting used these three words, and I found it useful to distinguish them. My understanding of their thoughts and actions led me to develop three preliminary definitions. Faith is a cozy feeling, an attitude of confidence without which optimism is impossible. Faith and optimism work hand in hand. Faith gives you the strength to move on. A faithful attitude allows you to imagine your future as you please. This ability to project yourself in another time frame is linked to performing an action, a movement. That's what I mean by optimism. But how can you move on if you fail to have any direction in mind? That direction is provided by your beliefs or your ideal. Religion doesn't have the monopoly of beliefs. Any ideal is, as it were, a belief. But to be effective, ideals or beliefs cannot be abstract. They have to be rooted in concrete situations. That's why I am in full agreement with Dewey's pragmatist theory. Dewey doesn't explain the ideal as something inaccessible, something you can't experience in the present. On the contrary, the ideal is constructed in your daily practice. It is the value you assign to every concrete situation you experience, a value that transcends and guides all your actions. As a result, being optimistic is being able to uncover in the present the actions that will allow you to build up your imagined future. Being optimistic is seizing the opportunities linked to your project. It requires being here and now fully, both in terms of time and space frames, and fully conscious. It also requires being driven by a desire. Opportunity is what brings the potential of the future into the present. With this consideration in mind, I will oppose optimism of acting and optimism of thinking, which is commonly defined as a positive thinking. That is, the optimism of Leibniz, cogently described and criticized by Voltaire. Optimism of thinking is not rooted in concrete situations and experiences. On the contrary, it is a perception of the world as it is not, in the name of an ideology or a belief that prevents any concrete action or any action actually adapted to the present situation. Today, this is typically the case for the majority of startup entrepreneurs, but also for large companies in the West, South Korea, or Japan. Acting with the ambition of constructing something that transcends us requires a fourfold presence in the world, requiring to be fully in the present moment, requiring to be connected to other people, requiring to be connected with your own thinking, desire, or ideal, requiring full awareness of where you are. This fourfold presence in the world is the condition of creativity, understood as an experience in Dewey's theory. When your actions are fully inscribed in the present time, they connect your past knowledge to your future ideal, thanks to their shared direction and values. Artists are ideal-typical of this fourfold presence in the world, but what happens in the opposite case? The best way to understand the meaning of this fourfold presence in the world is to take examples where this presence is truncated, whipped out, destroyed willingly. I will start with an extreme example, the inhuman experience told by Primo Levi in Is This a Man? First, annihilation of time. The Jewish condition in Auschwitz led to their dehumanization. The first consequence of their mistreatment was the annihilation of time, no future, no past, no present, and an inability to inhabit the present. The days were identical, dull, meaningless. Units of time had lost value. History had stopped. Secondly, inhabiting space became impossible. Prisoners were forced to regularly change their place in the dormitories. Their neighbors were zealously different persons. Establishing the slightest habit was systematically trumped. Primo Levi described the rituals of prisoners desperately striving to occupy space in order to gain a certain degree of security in face of the unforeseen. Those who survived in these conditions were those who managed to maintain a connection with one of the prisoners who were able to express themselves in their own language or another familiar one. Such exchanges were made almost impossible to establish. Those who had no connection to others became the drowned, the Muslims, the prisoners who were not alive, not dead, soulless. Fourth, being disconnected from their own thinking, desire, ideal, cut off from time, cut off from space, cut off from others, they finally became cut off from their own thoughts, emptied of themselves, reduced to the state of a machine. They were entirely dehumanized, cut off from any desire or ideal. Of course, this is a very radical example, but the robotization of the human beings can be observed to a lesser extent in very ordinary situations, such as in the working conditions of factory workers. The French Catholic philosopher Simone Weil experienced this firsthand and recounted it in her book, The Working Condition, first published in 1951. What Simone Weil defined as vocation is very similar to what Dewey called experience. For her, acting vocationally is to be fully present, fully aware, and at the same time being driven by a powerful desire for greater fulfillment. She considered that the work was the expression of the vocation insofar as it enabled the workers to use and become aware of all their abilities. For Dewey, there is no freedom without awareness of all our faculties, and the first faculty that needs to be educated is the one that allows us to discover and to experience all the others. This experience is nothing less than a complete interpenetration of ourselves with the situations of our environment. This is the only way to go beyond what we are in the present moment. Without this interpenetration and this painstaking attention to every action, the being shrinks, and this diminution of the being is what Simone Weil observed while working in a factory. For the workers, reduced to repeat quickly the same actions, without understanding their meaning, without a global vision of the factory, because they just know the small place where they work. Without being aware of the global object they contribute to manufacture or of the time it will take to manufacture it, they are trapped in the very instant present with neither past nor future, without any meaning. Then the thinking shrinks, recoils, consciousness becomes impossible. The absence of a spatial, temporal, functional, or relational vision amounts to enslaving the individual, annihilating desire and all possible projects. Very surprisingly, nowadays, We can observe some similar situation in big companies, not only among unskilled employees, but also among highly qualified executives. One of my colleagues, the French sociologist Jean-Philippe Boyoud, notes that today the highly qualified executives suffer of a dehumanized feeling similar to that observed by Simone Weil in his book, Between Hammer and Envied Executives Caught in a Trap. He writes, following different paths, the life of executives has come to echo the insecurity that was once the lot of blue-collar workers, white-collar employees, and supervisors alone. Insecurity about the future and job instability right up to the highest level due to the constant risk of sale, relocation, or closure. Deterioration in objective working conditions due to the ever-increasing demands for ever greater productivity. Eventually, questions arise for everyone concerning the point of continuing to work in an uncertain, anxiety-provoking environment that is ultimately often meaningless, empty of meaning, where the construction of meaning and justification for actions fails. The project then becomes an unattainable, a bait linked to distract managers from the present, rather than an opportunity to build the future by relying on the present. When a big company no longer offers its executives geographic stability, because relocation and outsourcing are always looming, or because their offices are interchangeable. When a big company no longer provides its executives with time stability, because the future is the only focal point. When a big company no longer provides its executives with thinking stability, because the construction of meaning is faulty. When a big company no longer provides its executive stability in their relationship with others, because trust is ruined by the competitive spirit, then the situation leads to burnout, depression, and sometimes even suicides. Among executives who were initially highly dedicated to or even passionate about their work. The resulting impression that salaried employment is a deprivation of freedom which is not compensated for by any sense of security leads many young people to choose other forms of professional commitment and to break away from the world of big business. With one of my students, I made a documentary about a startup accelerator called Numa. It is entitled Changing the World, the Numa's Entrepreneurs. The film shows the contrast between what the young entrepreneurs told and what they really felt. The entrepreneurs all said that being an entrepreneur was a calling, something they had wanted to become since childhood. Their ambition was to change the world by their actions and to make corporate management more horizontal. They were aware that it was ambitious and very demanding, but they enjoyed it. Their role models were the GAFAM founders, and they spoke the same language. Startup entrepreneurs from all over the world were invited to share their success stories. But the reality was very different. They were all depressed. They were all on antidepressants. They asked unpaid interns to work as hard as they did, including on weekends, and didn't understand why some of these interns were reluctant and not fully committed to their company. They had no life, no girlfriend or boyfriend. lived in very small apartments, had lost their friends, but they continued to repeat that they wanted to change the world. They wanted to shake up the established order. Most of them, if not all of them, failed. And after going through depression, they continued their career in a big company as a manager. That is what they claimed they had been avoiding all along. Instead of changing the world, they took their place in it and learned the GAFAM catechism at their own expense. The best example of optimism of acting I may give in this presentation is that of the entrepreneurs I've met in Haiti. I shot a documentary with them called The Careers of Optimism. I went there just after the passage of Hurricane Matthew, which devastated the south of the country. Haitians were very angry with the non-governmental organizations. They were already complaining the fact that these organizations had arrived very late. The local people were already very active and knew exactly what they needed. They were present and very aware of the situation they were facing. Their actions were not spectacular, but they acted collectively, helping each other in a way that corresponded to the needs of the population. On the contrary, the non-governmental organizations arrived with their own projects in mind, without taking into account what the local people were doing, and they proposed solutions that did not correspond to what the people expected. Their projects were inappropriate, and many failed. The non-governmental organizations didn't understand the anger of the Haitians. They were motivated and optimistic. They really believed in their charitable mission, but they were not aware of the real situation. They didn't share information with the locals. They didn't understand their needs. They only thought of applying what they imagined was needed without being present in the place, without being in touch with the situation and the people who lived there. What I argue here is that the actions of the non-governmental organizations were based on an optimism of thinking, while the actions of the Haitians were based on an optimism of acting. That is, an optimism that reflects know-how handing down from generation to generation, which becomes instinctive, an ability to react swiftly and with very little, because in such difficult life situations, like those of the Haitians have been living for several centuries, the reflex is not to make long-term plans, but rather to be aware of everything that happens in each situation. That requires to be fully present to be fully in the present moment. That requires to be connected to other people. That requires full awareness of where they are. That requires to be connected with a direction that allows to improve or stabilize the very near future. That is an inherited capital, the only one they really developed, a capital that dwindles when other capitals develop. You may think that all this is far away from the situation of Korea and its future. But can't we say that in the recent history of South Korea, since the Korean War, the country has moved from an optimism of acting to an optimism of thinking, as the country's development has increased and neoliberalism has been introduced? Of course, the situation of the workers were certainly very similar to what Simone Weil experienced. But in South Korea, as in the West or in Japan, managers seem to be the real victims of neoliberalism. And the more they suffer from the neoliberal catechism, of positive thinking, the more they speak the same language. One of my students, Kang Dae-un, observes in his doctoral dissertation the consequences of the fierce competition between companies concerning relations between employees, but also between employers and employers. All relationships seem to be governed by the obligation to respect and to develop a nunchi attitude. What used to be an inherited attitude of paying attention to the present situation is becoming a word that has been tweaked for judging people. It was very surprising for me to discover that in the wake of the Korean cultural wave, a book translated into a wide range of foreign languages, landing in France with the title Nunchi. I read it and found all the cliché of positive thinking wrapped up in caricatured examples. The author, a Korean American, claimed that the nunchi attitude was the result of the culture that Koreans had integrated. I agree with her, but what had been assimilated has been profoundly reshaped and no longer leads employees to be truly connected to the situation they belong to, but only to fear being excluded. Some of them left their company and decided to settle on Jeju-do, but the vast majority of the employees can't leave their job. They have to endure it. I suppose that some of them try to find elsewhere something that helps them to reconnect with the fourfold presence in the world. With this perspective in mind, I would like to conduct a field work on a meditation center called Ways and Stonefield Community, which was established in Dojeon some years ago by a Canadian Jesuit, Bernard Senecal, who's received Korean citizenship. People can stay there a few days, but when they are there, they have to take part in a variety of activities, working in the fields of or engaging in meditation. I intend to stay there for a few months. Few months is to observe who comes, why they come, how they are when they arrive and when they leave. It could be an initial fieldwork to observe how people resist the current processes of globalization, capitalization, digitalization, and also dehumanization. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, many thanks for this fascinating talk, Professor Luca. I'm sure we will continue to talk about some issues you raised throughout the discussion. We have the lineup of presentation for the two from English departments and the two from anthropology. So first speaker is Jung-ha Kim from English department, and then she will talk about more Gatfeng and Igijus as well. So we will just straightforward. Yeah, go on with it.
Okay, hello, I'm Jung-ha Kim in English at Seoul National University. Thank you, Professor Kim and Luca, for your inspiring and insightful presentations. I'm going to be very brief. I'm going to briefly introduce my project because we're running out of time and getting hungry, and so I'm going to briefly introduce my project in responding to the two keynote speakers with a focus on the frameworks of symptomatology and survivalism. Two concepts that our team is tackling together and attempting to theorize. I think that the two presentations demonstrate that modern and contemporary Korea as an objective study requires a distinctive methodology, a very distinctive methodology, and which is symptomatology. So for Professor Luca, one symptom to understand the socio-cultural dynamics of Korean society is neoliberal optimism, right? And for Professor Kim, it is Korean survivalism as a form of the Koreanness, not content of the Koreanness, and which I think it's a kind of structural feeling in Korean history, right? Like a kind of master plot or unconscious core in Korean history. So in relation to that, my project focuses on the affective dimension of symptoms and affectivity of symptoms. As Bruno Latour points out, a symptom is not a matter of fact, but a matter of concern, a matter of affect. This means that I think a symptom does not exist apart from our concern, anxiety, and engagement as a being in the world. We, as actant and patients, like sick people in the world, we affect and are affected by the outside, the other, the world. And a symptom is the result of a compromise between all these forces. So therefore, the network surrounding symptoms is both ontological and epistemological. So symptoms and symptomatology is basically about, I think, is an affective entanglement. In line with this, my paper titled, "And So I Live Another Day, Senses of Gasseng and Exhaustion in K Narratives," is a case study of an affective entanglement in K symptomatology. This project actually began as my own observation of my students at Seoul National University, who are some of the most hardworking young people in South Korea, living the so-called Gasseng lifestyle. Gasseng is a Korean word. Seng means life, so God is God in English, and so it refers to living very diligently and doing one's best and pursuing like constant productivity and self-improvement until one becomes a god or master of their lives. And I think this resonates, Gasseng lifestyle, resonate with Professor Lucas' take on Korean optimism as survivalism. And students here are highly successful and high-achieving students, but they're also among the most exhausted people, groups in South Korea, I think. And interacting with my students, I started thinking about the uncanny coexistence of survivalism and exhaustion, optimism and depression, and the life drive and the death drive at the same time in Korean society. So now I'm navigating many texts, but for now I think I'll be focusing on Lee Chang-dong's film Burning and the Korean TV series My Liberation Notes, 나의 해방일지. And I'm interested in how these two works show the affective symptoms of neoliberal survivalism felt by Korean youth precariat and the effects of anger and exhaustion. So as I'm working on the topic of the Korean youth precariat and their affect as a symptom of neoliberal survivalism, I was wondering if for the two keynote speakers, I'm wondering if the variant of generation is significant to your work and the status of Korean young people, Korean youth, how significant the status of Korean youth in your project? Because, I mean, neoliberalism is also a universal phenomenon, right? So what is peculiarity or singularity of Korean youth in your project? I was wondering. And additionally, I also wonder how you might think the temporality of neoliberal survivalism. I mean, how this temporality of neoliberal survivalism turns both to the past and to the future. And of course, neoliberalism is a historical product constructed from the past, right? But it is also hinders the subject from engaging with history, right? And also, I think neoliberalism is also a force that anticipates a future catastrophe. So, yeah, if time permits, I wonder how you might think that, like, the issue of temporality. Thank you.
Many thanks for this very insightful comment. As you can see, that we tried to give some the comment on the keynote speech while connecting their respective the research in our K Future team as well. So next discussant is Professor Yi from the English department.
Hello, my name is Dong-Shin Lee. I'm also from the English department at SNU. I'm mostly teaching contemporary American fiction and science fiction, and my research is mostly on the post-humanism. And as you can guess, Korean studies is so not my field. So it's weird to be here. But if I'm forced to offer some sort of the commonality to justify my presence here, I have to say it's the question of future. It is the future that drove me to study science fiction and post-humanism in the first place, as I was increasingly dissatisfied with the representational literature and literary criticism, which I described, though I admit a bit unfairly, as past-oriented. And it is the future where I found a common ground to discuss with these scholars on my team, hence the name of the team, K Future. Now, the future is, I think, a common theme in today's two keynote speeches by Professor Kim and Professor Luca. Although they both talk about the survivor and Professor Luca optimism, I think it's interesting that there is a certain notion of future underlying their talk. And I guess if I have a question for them, how they think about the future, how they define the future in their, I guess, research. So when I was thinking about the future, it's very dark, especially in Korea, not just in Korea, but in the world as well. And the future, in a sense, whatever it is now is a luxury and at best an afterthought. And at worst, future is impossible if you are powerless and you have a certain idea of future, and it's just that future is impossible, or it's unchangeable if you're powerless and someone else, I guess mostly in those in power, set the future for you. So in a sense, the future is either impossible or unchangeable for most of us, which I guess why people are, as Professor Lucas says, depressed and burned out and kill themselves. So the impossibility of the future envisioned by the powerless may be due to the simple fact that they are, I guess, they don't have enough power to realize their future. One easy way to solve this problem would be gather up enough power, which means that the powerless need to streamline different ideas of future into one so as to gain enough support. But this means making the future an easy target for those in power. Moreover, making diverse futures into a singular one requires certain logic. And more often than not, that logic is borrowed from the oppressors, or the powerful, as so many post-colonial discussions have shown, which again makes an easy target for the powerful who are already versatile to talk about and deal with that logic. Thus, the future envisioned by the powerless unfortunately shows, to borrow Frederick Jameson's words, our incapacity to imagine the future, end quote. On the other hand, in this age, the unchangeability of the future set by those in power seems to draw its power, ironically, from the formidability of the problems caused by the logic that helped create the future. That is, the future seeming unchangeability is not, as it may have been in the previous centuries, the evidence to the high and self-righteous value of the future or the logic behind it. On the contrary, that future or logic is an easy target for harsh criticisms for having caused so many problems we are experiencing today. It is not only because it is easy, not only because it is so big as to be an obvious target, but also because it is used to explain diverse and remote problems easily. Terms like the Anthropocene and Capitalocene, which force us to see current problems in a sort of the monological worldview, offer fine examples to this. This is why Donna Haraway is suspicious of such terms, offers her own truthing to emphasize the complexity and multiplicity of the world of ours. Nevertheless, the Anthropocene and Capitalocene prevail, so is their monological worldview, according to which the future seems almost unchangeable, that is, as unchangeable as the Anthropocene or capitalism is predominant. The impossibility and unchangeability of the future overshadows Korean society today, and symptoms of that future are popping up here and there, the most explicit of which would be the low birth rate and high suicide rate. But even with these catastrophic symptoms of the future, life goes on, as it always has been. Why can't we see more symptoms? What makes us not see ourselves trapped in the future and the logic behind it? How do we feel the urgency of having different futures? And where do we find it? My project is planning, my project that I'm planning now begins with these questions. I believe that, to quote Dominic Pachman, quote, the digitalization of the distraction, which is too constant and total to allow any way out, is particularly effective in Korean society, giving people a few chances to experience prolonged boredom, or better, as Heidegger calls, profound boredom. As Michael Newman is right as saying, quote, the only way of transforming everything would be a transfigured relation to time as such, whether this is the time of being for Heidegger or messianic redemption for Benjamin. Such is the project of the great boredom, end quote. And what is really in need for Korean society is the creative power of boredom to envision futures that have no relation to the future we have. So based on these ideas, my project is called the Bored K-Monsters, Ample Generations, and Their Profound Boredom. So I'm just quickly described my project. And monsters populating many Korean dramas and films are rarely boring, and their popularity is constantly rising, as is attested by the unceasing production of K-monster programs on Netflix, such as Hellbound, the Gyeongsang Creature, and Sweet Home, to name a few. K-monsters, however, seemed bored. It's not for the lack of action they are bored. They are, after all, in constant and dire fights with the human characters who keep coming up with new ways to fight, and sometimes kill the monsters. The dramatic present hardly lacks excitement for them. What causes their boredom is the future, where only prolongation of the present awaits them. In the future, there will be no total annihilation of their enemies, that is, humans, because no production companies will allow such an ending. Nor there be superheroes capable of annihilating the monsters due to budgetary limitation or to the fact, to speak frankly, this is not Hollywood. We don't have that kind of superheroes. Thus, K-monsters are bored, trapped in the present, and that constantly offers them what may amount to distraction, no matter how exciting and dire they are. So I'm going to talk about these bored K-monsters and how bored they are, and how their boredom is sort of the representative of the Korean society. But at the same time, I want to also tap into the potential of their deep boredom to turn profound, and drawing on Heidegger's notion of profound boredom, envisions a state that is non-relational to the present and also future as imagined in the present. Thank you.
Many thanks for your exciting project on profound boredom as well. Professor Lee from the Anthropology Department will be the third speaker.
Hi, I'm Seung-Chul Lee from Anthropology Department. I found both presentations incredibly interesting because they address issues related to the future, temporality, and our affective or psychological responses to these issues. The theme of futurity resonates with my recent research on young Korean cryptocurrency investors and various investment advisory YouTube channels. So given the limited time, I briefly introduce my research under the K-Future project and discuss how it connects with the presentations by both professors. So first, I'd like to interpret the survivalism and optimism presented by both professors in relation to Pierre Bourdieu's discussion of the duality of modern temporality. In his ethnography of the Kabyle people in Algeria, Bourdieu explains how this community had to abandon the traditional notion of temporality and learn the capitalist habitus or the temporal disposition of capitalism. He describes this capitalist temporality as the contradictory conjunction of calculable and but open. So I will not read the whole quotation, but the last sentence, the future as a side of possibility that are open and susceptible to calculation. So here possibility has a kind of ambivalent meaning, dual meaning, which is like susceptible to calculation, and it is also open. So in other words, the future now emerges as an empty horizon, calculable through various devices, while simultaneously being regarded as an open and subject to change. So as Immanuel Wallerstein says, in modernity, change becomes normal. This means that the future becomes both an object of calculation and an object of belief. While this temporality may seem contradictory at first glance, the duality of the future in capitalist modernity seems to be found in various concepts used in capitalist analysis concerning the future. For example, economist Frank Knight famously distinguishes between risk and uncertainty. According to him, risk can be calculated through probability distributions, while uncertainty refers to an event that goes beyond such calculability. Or Keynes' distinction between enterprise and speculation also seems to reflect this division. According to Keynes, investment is based on the evaluation of companies' past performance and underlying capital, while speculation involves predicting the unpredictable preference of the market. Within this theoretical framework, I've been examining now how Korean investment advisory YouTubers predict and present the future of the financial market. What I found interesting is how these YouTubers combine so-called objective data with fictional narratives. So they present various numbers, figures, or graphs to predict the future, but